And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, From the Boardroom to the Frontline, Why is it so difficult to sell cybersecurity? I'm going to hand things over to our cybersecurity product manager, Mr. Buck Chell.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. I'm Buck Chell, the product manager for cybersecurity at the New Horizons corporate office. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is the third out of 10 cybersecurity-focused webinars that New Horizons is hosting in the month of October. And October has been designated by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security as National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which is now in its 15th year as an annual campaign to raise awareness about the importance of cybersecurity. National Cybersecurity Awareness Month is a collaborative effort between the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and its public and private partners, including the National Cybersecurity Alliance, to raise awareness about the importance of cybersecurity and individual cyber hygiene. New Horizons Cybersecurity Awareness Month is now in our third year as an annual focus month, and the goal of our Cybersecurity Month webinars, which are done in conjunction with industry partners, is to provide you with a better understanding of how to stay safer online with input from subject matter experts and to help enhance your organization's cyber resilience and overall cybersecurity posture. We have a Cybersecurity Awareness Month landing pages that you can find on your local New Horizons websites, which you can find by going to www.newhorizons.com and clicking on Find a Location at the top of the page. The Cybersecurity Awareness Month landing pages can be found under Promotions, where you can find a full list of our upcoming cybersecurity webinars, recordings for webinars that you've missed, along with free downloadable cybersecurity resources. The 10 cybersecurity webinars that New Horizons is hosting this month cover different aspects about today's ever-evolving cyber threat landscape. And today's webinar, From the Boardroom to the Frontline, Why it's so difficult to sell cybersecurity, is where we're going to discuss critical challenges and how these can be adapted to meet different organizational demands, from the boardroom to the front line, to be more effective and successful in mitigating the business risks of cyber attack. We have two subject matter experts which will be speaking today. Nick Wilding is the General Manager of Cyber Resilience at AXELOS Global Best Practice. He has spent 25 years as a senior market development and in senior market development and marketing roles. And his role at AXELOS, he leads Cyber Resilience Best Practice Division. He's responsible for the successful design, continued improvement, and success of Resilia, an integrated best practice portfolio designed to put people at the center of an organization's cyber resilience strategy and response, enabling them to effectively recognize, respond, and recover from cyber attacks. Before AXELOS, Nick spent 11 years at BAE Systems, Applied Intelligence, formerly known as Dedica, where he helped set up cybersecurity business and led their cybersecurity market engagement, marketing, and thought leadership. Joining Nick is Richard Knowlton, who is a strategic advisor to Resilia. Richard founded RKA in 2014 as a consultancy advising international organizations on all aspects of cybersecurity risk management. Richard specializes in the management of digital risk and development of effective digital resilience and awareness programs. Richard was Group Advocate Security Director of Vodafone, which is a key minority holder of Verizon, the key shareholder between 2009 and 2015, and having previously worked at Milan for several years as head of security for the Italian Unicredit Group, the largest bank in Central and Eastern Europe. They both have longer bios. I could continue reading them, but rather than giving a prolonged introduction to both our subject matter experts, I'm going to turn it over to them. Nick and Richard, you both have the floor.
Many thanks, Buck, and delighted to have the opportunity of talking to you today around what Richard and I believe to be one of the most critical challenges that most organizations face, and that's the challenge felt both in the boardroom and across all their people in the way in which people and the behaviors that displayed by people still remains one of the greatest vulnerabilities for organizations, as opposed to one of the greatest strengths. So before just going into the presentation, just a little bit about AXELOS. First of all, if you do not know AXELOS, very quickly, we're a joint venture between the UK government and Capita, one of the UK's leading outsourcing organisations. We own and nurture global best practice methodologies and frameworks like ITIL and Prince2, and I have the privilege of having created, launched, and now leading Resilia, which is cyber resilience best practice and a portfolio of services based on understanding and knowing that cyber is a critical business risk, which ultimately requires a balanced response across an organization, across the enterprise, which balances people, processes, technology, compliance, governance, and leadership. And hopefully in the webinar this afternoon, we'll hear from Richard and I on many occasions talking about this, the importance of making sure that cyber resilience and an organization's resilience to growing cyber attacks and the impacts from those attacks has critically got to be across the enterprise and has got to be led from the top, and that everybody has a critical role to play. And Resilia, our portfolio of services are essentially designed to provide all people within an organization, whether you're in the boardroom, whether you're a specialist information security person, or anybody else working in the organization, is to provide all of those people with the awareness, the training, the insight, the confidence to be able to make the right decisions at the right time in the face of rapidly evolving and changing cyber threats. So I'd like to start this afternoon's or this morning's webinar with a message from the Chief Exec. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the, there we go. So a message from your CEO. I'd like to start by reading out a letter from someone I know very well. He's called Jim Baines. He's the chief exec of a mid-sized, highly reputable organization based in the US. It's a packaging company whose key clients operate across a number of sectors, but critically in the FMCG and the pharmaceutical sectors. Jim was the target and victim of a cyber attack on him, and he's been through a painful journey over the last 2 to 3 years, and he wants to write a letter, an open letter to peers of his, other chief execs and other business leaders, to ensure that they learnt some lessons from his experience, and hopefully that they didn't go through the same pain that he has. Let me just read out this letter. Cybercrime wasn't on my agenda. It never occurred to me that I might be a target. Board directors, chief execs, I thought we were immune, but I was wrong. We're actually the very best and the biggest targets. We're the whales that smart hackers want to harpoon. We know all the secrets. We have privileged access to all the sensitive and lucrative parts of our business. And it makes perfect sense. Why start at the back door when you can go right in at the front? And we're just as human as everyone else. We make mistakes, we're careless. In fact, we're vulnerable because we think we're immune. And that's what I thought. My company, which I built from nothing over 30 years, when I put everything on the line, is now losing clients, money, and most importantly, reputation and credibility. I'm fighting back, but it's hard. You need to know that you're a target. Everyone on your board is a target. We have to remember that at the end of every system, at the end of every process, and at the end of every bit of technology is a human being. No one's immune, everyone's vulnerable, however powerful or successful they may be. You need to know that and act now. So a very impassioned plea from Jim. I know the journey he's been on and the pain that he's been through. He is beginning to come out the other side, and good for him for going public in highlighting the challenges that he's faced as a result of a relatively simple targeted attack on him. The other quote on that slide there is another quote from another chief exec. It's a guy called Soren Skoo. He is the chief exec of Maersk, the world's biggest carrier of seaborne freight. They were hit hard by the NotPetya attack last year, and he went public to the press after the attack to highlight the sorts of things that how he felt, the emotions that he felt as and when it happened, and the impacts were very significant. Their container ships stood still at sea, and their 76 port terminals around the world ground to a halt. So the chief exec said, it was quite frankly a shocking experience. Our emails went down, all our address systems went down. We ended up having to use WhatsApp on our private phones. Most business problems, I will have an intuitive idea on what to do. But with this and my skills, I had no intuitive idea on how to move forward. Until you've experienced something like this, people call them black swan events. You just don't realize what can happen, just how serious it can be. Again, a very open and enlightening view, and very refreshing to hear a chief exec just talking about the emotional impact as much as anything on the organization. It's been reported widely that Maersk have lost at least $300 million as a result of that attack. But as I say, with Jim Baines, they are fighting back hard as well. I would suggest that there's going to be many more stories and interviews like this with business leaders in the media in the future. But what can we learn from it, and what can we do differently in the boardroom and with all of our staff? And hopefully you'll get a few ideas and new insight from the presentations from myself and Richard this afternoon. We do all need new digital skills, new life skills to survive in the digital age. Without them, we run the risk of making it all too easy for attackers to compromise and damage our hard-won corporate reputations. It's very true to say that we're all enjoying the benefits of these wonderful digital technologies to grow stronger, more agile and responsive businesses. But at the same time, these technologies have opened up a whole new world of risk, as we know. And mitigating these risks is not just about technology. Although technology is a critical part in any effective response, organizational response to the risks we face, it is one part of it. Investment in cybersecurity technologies continues to increase, but at the same time, the scale, the number, and the impact of the cyber attacks that we're facing also continues to increase. There does seem to be something missing in our organizational response. And the stark reality is that the majority of successful cyber attacks succeed because of our human error, the unwitting actions of anyone in our organization, regardless of their role or responsibilities, whether you're in the boardroom or on the front line. So as a result, we need to have to recognize that cyber resilience is fundamentally a leadership and a people and behavioral challenge as much as it is about technology and compliance and governance. It does remain remarkably easy for any attacker or attack group to target our human vulnerabilities. I would suggest that all too often cyber attackers find it easier to communicate with, engage with, and influence the behaviors of our own staff than we do. They attack people, not systems, or they target people, not systems. So I'd like to hand over now to Richard, who will bring it to life through some of his own experiences, both in terms of the challenge with all of our people, and particular views in terms of the way in which the boardroom could more effectively manage this big business risk. Over to you, Richard.
Many thanks, Nick, and hi, everybody. Nick gave me a nice little segue link there when he was talking about digital technology, and so I always like to begin with a statement which surprises a lot of people. We're talking about technology, but as Nick said, the majority of cybersecurity incidents are caused by humans. And it's a well-established fact. It's been recognized in many surveys over several years. There are almost always people who do something without thinking or out of ignorance, or frankly, just because they do something stupid. They're what we laughingly know in the security trade as the bad, mad, sad, and stupid. Sometimes, of course, there are people who do something wrong out of malicious motives. They're using their inside knowledge of a company's systems, perhaps to steal money or to get revenge on their employer in some way. And those malicious insiders can cause tremendous damage in a business. but they're always going to be in a small minority. And I'd like to focus on the overwhelming majority of cases where perhaps up to 80% of cybersecurity incidents are caused by simple human error. Now, that statement should make us all sit up and think hard, I believe. Our whole lives are dominated by IT and the internet. The smartphone has only been around for about 20 years or a little bit more, but it's now difficult for anybody under 40 to remember life before we were permanently connected to the mobile internet. And yet after those 20 years, there's still a great deal of ignorance about the security implications of this brave new world of ours and how we should manage the risks, particularly to our personal data. And I feel from my own experience that security is generally seen as the boring bit. It gets lost in the fun, the speed, the convenience, and let's not forget the dopamine rush that the digital world is bringing to us. And unfortunately, it's that ignorance or carelessness that most people are taking with them into their office and workplace. So what can be the consequences? A couple of years ago, I was advising a major international retailer. Their business was booming and their products were flying off the shelves. In fact, their retail operation was under real pressure to meet customer demand. At that time, the company was operating mainly through a big network of local stores. In each of those stores, the staff were using a central customer database to enter and update client records. All very logical, but that was where the problems started. Access to these sensitive customer records was through the internet. It was not through an internal company network. Frankly, it was quicker that way for the company. And as staff regularly rotated from store to store, they got into the habit of using just one username and one password for the whole system wherever they were working that particular day. And they didn't change that password very often, if ever. Didn't all that make sense in terms of speed and convenience? Well, perhaps, until one manager gave the password to a friend so that she could access a special offer. And then that friend in turn told a friend on Facebook. And before long, all sorts of people were browsing through the customer records at will. And then customers began to notice that their credit card details were being misused. This kind of episode often gives rise to one of those phrases that I find really unhelpful. People say, your staff are your weakest link in cyber security. I would turn that round completely. In any well-run business, your staff are not only your greatest asset, they're also your best defense against cyber attacks. But of course, those staff need to be well led. And in the scenario I've just described, it's clear that the staff people were also let down by their bosses. Clearly, nobody had set out clearly to them the importance of good security to the company's success, the correct processes to follow, and more generally, the need for a culture which always put the customer first. And that included making sure that sensitive data was well protected. And I'll come back to that if I can in a moment. If you look at successful cyber attacks in recent years, and I spend a lot of time looking at these all around the world, they don't vary much from sector to sector. If I'm talking about aviation or health or automotive or pharmaceuticals or manufacturing, in each of those sectors, IT systems are being targeted for anything that will turn a quick and easy buck for crooks. They'll be trying to get hold of banking, invoice, and customer payment databases. And not forgetting, of course, your own internal HR databases, which will contain bank details and so on for your employees. And whatever the attack, the same old weaknesses will let the bad guys in. And to repeat, those weaknesses are seldom technical. They involve people, and people are the constant factor in all business sectors, of course. The fact is that you can have the most sophisticated IT systems in the world, but they're operated by people who can make mistakes. And it follows, not surprisingly, that the attackers target people as the main way to get into IT systems. So the people factor is absolutely central to cyber security. And yet too many top executives continue to see cybersecurity as a purely operational risk that's too technical for them to monitor and that's best left to the geeks and anoraks. the formal job titles we use for IT experts in our companies, of course. And we can see this lack of attention in all sorts of surveys across Europe, globally, in the US as well. And just to put together some figures which I've seen from a global survey, perhaps 74% of businesses across the world say that cybersecurity is a high priority for their senior management. 74%, okay, 3/4 of companies around the world generally say that cybersecurity is really important for them. But only less than 30% of businesses actually have formal cybersecurity policies in place. In other words, most companies recognize that they have a major threat, but only around a quarter are developing systematic policies to mitigate risks. And I should add that the same survey say that 43% of businesses admitted to having experienced a cybersecurity breach or attack in the last 12 months. At which point, I must admit, a sly smile comes to my lips. I say 43% is far too low. It means there are a lot of additional people who simply don't yet know that they have been attacked. So why is there this disconnect at senior levels in companies between a recognition of the fact that there is a major threat out there and the fact that you actually need to do something about it in practice? Now, it's obvious, and clearly I've seen it across my experience, that directors generally are highly intelligent people. And the statistics show, as I've said, that many of them understand perfectly well that cyber incidents are a really serious threat to their business. Why don't boards and senior executives take a much more active role in managing cyber risk? Now, what I want to do is just to pull together a number of factors that I've seen in my experience of talking about security risk management with a lot of boards and executive committees in a whole range of sectors across the world in the last 2 to 3 years. And I'd sum them up perhaps as follows. The first one is that very few directors have a technology background. Of course, it depends a lot on the sector, but a lot of them will have backgrounds in accountancy, finance, or the law, let's say, and a majority of them, in my experience, are probably going to be arts graduates. By definition, smart people, they're competitive, and they're going to be used to shining in their own business environment and probably across the sector as well. And that means that they're not comfortable when they're challenged on issues like cyber risk management that are outside their comfort zone. In my experience, they'll seek to deflect them towards specialists. And so I suppose my comment would be, so far, so human. In addition, of course, senior executives are almost always under tremendous pressure. The monthly executive committee pre-read in my previous company, Vodafone, was nearly 300 slides, most of them packed with really detailed data on which the directors had to make important investment decisions, for example. So from their point of view, why add yet another subject to that agenda, especially one that was unfamiliar to them and outside their normal skill set? So easy to put the blame on the side of the board and the executives, not paying attention, not interested in the subject. But I would argue too that security people are often to blame too. If they fail to understand how senior people think and how senior people evaluate business risk, and particularly if they stick to a specialist language and vocabulary that only security nerds can understand, then of course the busy laser brains on the board are going to lose patience, get irritated, and dismiss them. And I can give a good example from my early days in the telecoms business. During my handover briefings from my predecessor and from my department, I was given a dictionary of the 113, yes, 113 different types of fraud that exist in the telecom sector. Each had its own complex definitions and it had its own acronyms, and how security people love acronyms. Now, I'd come from the finance sector, so I knew a bit about fraud typology, but this was a completely new world for me in telecoms. And I had to speak regularly to my executive committee about fraud management, how to combat it, and particularly how to get investment. And how could I have any hope at all of getting the support and investments I needed unless I could translate that specialist fraud jargon into simple layman's language? And finally, and I'm sure that Nick will refer to this, a really good way to engage decision makers' attention is to tell them stories, anecdotes that they can relate to their own experience. All of us are like that. One good story is worth a dozen slides of dense metrics. So I painted perhaps a little bit of a pessimistic picture. Is it all hopeless? Are security people doomed to being misunderstood and excluded from the top circles of their companies? And I would say no, I'm an optimist. The good news is that companies really can drive down the human risk factor. And for me, it's predominantly a question of culture. A company that insists that security is at least as important as health and safety, for example, will be in a much better position to defend itself against cyber attack. Now, another example. When I first went into the telecoms industry, my company was suffering an unacceptably high level of deaths and injuries in the workplace. Given the nature of the industry, these incidents were principally down to falls when working at height, electrocution, and car accidents, for example. And the group, this is 10 years ago or more now, said, no, this is not acceptable. And they implemented a system of what were called the 5 golden rules for health and safety. So that meant the use of helmets and safety harnesses when people were working at height, proper processes for dealing with high voltages, and an absolute insistence that all company personnel must wear seatbelts. At every monthly meeting of the executive committee, there was a dedicated session to reviewing accidents that had happened in the previous month. And at the annual senior leadership team meeting, a whole session was devoted to showing photographs and brief biographies of those who'd been killed or seriously injured in the previous year, with a detailed commentary on the family background of the person, turning the individual killed or injured into a real person, details about their family, and on the lessons that needed to be learned from each incident. Now, pretty quickly, these 5 golden rules began to be taken very seriously. They became a part of the company culture of who it was as a business. Now, I pause at this point. How many businesses have a similar serious drive to create a security culture? I would argue not nearly enough. And that insistence on the importance of security must come from the top, from people like Jim Baines, quoted by Nick at the beginning, which of course is a problem if the board and senior executives don't see cybersecurity as an issue for them, but as a purely operational matter. But I go back to my example of health and safety. Health and safety certainly was not a fashionable subject for most boards 10, 15 years ago. It took a combination of things for the board to engage. First of all, pressure from outside the company, including from shareholders, governments perhaps, and the media. Secondly, serious incidents, not just within the company, but more generally, and stories about their impacts on people and the business. And finally, really good communication from the specialists in the health and safety function. Now, I would argue that at the present moment, there's probably no more pressing risk management issue for any board than cybersecurity. And I'm confident that with the right approach from security, we can work with top management to drive down security risk. And to return to where I started, that risk is principally from human action inside organizations. So we'll have an opportunity to have some questions at the end. But if you have one takeaway from what I've said in the presentation so far, most successful cyber attacks exploit human and process weaknesses. Turn your employees into your first and strongest line of defense. If you don't, then your company and your shareholders will suffer, and so will your employees. Thank you.
Many thanks, Richard. Great to hear some of the personal experiences and stories that you've had from your long experience within the both in the boardroom and from the security perspective. Let me take Richard's comments on, and firstly, absolutely support his comment about the power of storytelling in helping to demystify and translate what can be quite a complex issue into guidance, advice, insights that can be easily used by both the board and people across your organization. But firstly, a few more stats, I'm afraid. So the Internet Security Foundation report, it goes back quite a few years now, 2014, but at the time they were interested and still are very interested in reporting on actually does security education work. And without going through these in any detail, it did highlight the fact that if organizations do any training in this area, typically it is tick box training, annual compliance driven training, which is seen as corporate passive training, and I would suggest has little or no impact on behavior change, which is what we're trying to do effectively. Because for me, this is about a security control, perhaps your most critical security control. And in the same way that organizations adapt and evolve their technical security controls to respond to ever-changing vulnerabilities and threats, so we need to take the same approach to our people. So, you know, the message from Richard and I today is just how effective can we be in making sure our leaders and employees believe it is their responsibility and in their control to play their role in resilience. Because if those leadership teams are not well informed or have the appropriate insight to set the right tone from the top, and employees find that they cannot follow an order, all orders actually do become questionable. For us, essential security hygiene means making sure your employees can follow the security policies that you have and still perform their job. We have to make sure that security awareness training across the organization with all staff is seen as helping and supporting and acknowledging the roles that we all have to play and what we're paid for on a day-to-day basis, so that training is seen as something as part of our everyday role. We need to move to a culture where firstly, we're providing our people with the information to allow them to be more confident and to talk about this more effectively, but also that they are seen to be understanding that this is their responsibility, and where ongoing awareness and education is, as one CISO said to me the other day, frictionless. It's part of their every day-to-day job. It's the way we do things around here. We know we are doing the right thing. And it's a bit like learning to drive a car for me. You know, if you remember learning to drive a car in the first few months after you've passed your test, you are still thinking very, very carefully about every single action that you take. Now, if you've been driving for many years, it is second nature. You get from A to B and you think, how did I do that? It is second nature. And that's the sort of environment and culture we need to develop. A cartoon that some of you may well have seen. I must apologize if there's anybody called Dave on the call today. It's not just people called Dave who fall into the human error. Now, this might be a funny cartoon. It emphasizes the fact that it's not just about technology, but I think there's a key underlying message here. And sadly, this cartoon suggests, as Richard was saying, that we run the risk of thinking that people are stupid. They're not. They are not your weakest link. They have to be your greatest defense. But sadly, I would suggest the techniques that we are adopting and this continued reliance in many, many organizations on providing this sort of all staff once a year tick box approach to training around information security awareness simply has no influence, or does it sustain long-term behavioral change? At best, I think it reminds us of some essentials. At worst, it's treated as a necessary evil, a distraction, something to be completed as quickly as possible. Training and staff awareness, like any technical security control, has to be effective. Currently, cyber awareness training, I think it's seen to be being done to people. It is passive. It doesn't truly engage people. And for me, it's as if we're trying to program our people every year in the way that we program computers and expecting people to behave in the way that we want them to do it, when we want them to do it. And I'm very pleased to say that doesn't work with people. We do need a different and more effective approach, one that understands that we all learn in different ways, that makes it easy and simple and engaging to do the training and part of your everyday job. And this is where Resilia Frontline comes in. And as Richard highlighted, it's much like our understanding of the importance of health and safety in the workplace has changed radically over the last 25 years. So we believe very strongly we now need to be all cyber smart, cyber savvy, and have the awareness and the vigilance and the confidence to do the right thing at the right time. So we've developed Resilia Frontline. It's training that's based around 4 key principles that try and play to the agenda that Richard and I have been talking about, making it easy to use and effective. These 4 key principles that we've used to design and launch the learning are, firstly, to change behaviors, organizations need to make their training engaging, relevant, and valuable. What does that mean for us? It means short, nugget-sized learning. No module should take longer than 10 minutes to complete. There's a lot of evidence out there and a lot of facts out there that we know that the attention span of most adults ranges between 8 to 10 minutes. So trying to impart a lot of information in one 1-hour learning module every year clearly is not going to be effective. Coming back to Richard's point earlier about language, we have to make this easy to understand. I've seen all too many awareness training programs that talk all too quickly and in all too much detail around technology. This is not about technology. This is about providing the very simple, practical guidance we all need to make the right decisions at the right time. So our learning has no security jargon, it has no acronyms, and we use real life scenarios to make it relevant. And for example, many of our scenarios are based at home, telling people how to most effectively look after their own or their family's information, which at the end of the day is their most precious information. And again, there's a lot of evidence and research that suggests that firstly, that is information that our staff would see as most valuable to them. And secondly, that in adopting and changing their behaviors at home, they bring those behaviors into work. The second principle, behaviors change over time, not overnight. So effective cyber awareness training has to be based around a campaign-based approach. It can't be just a one hit every year. You have to provide refreshers and reminders to reinforce the learning throughout the year. And a number of our clients, we help in guiding them on not just using our online training, but providing them with some insight into how best to launch and manage their offline activities to support the online learning. So using things like team meetings, lunch and learn sessions, competitions, surveys, all sorts of different ways in which you can provide your people with the opportunity to engage and discuss it openly. Again, I see sadly all too often environments and cultures in organizations where people are just too scared and too worried about putting their hand up and actually admitting that they think they've made a mistake, or actually that they think that something else is going wrong in the business because they're worried about the consequences and implications of reporting that. And we need to flip that. We need to have an effective balance between not just disciplining poor cyber behaviors on repeat poor behaviors, but critically, we need to be rewarding very good cyber behaviors. Thirdly, people do absolutely learn in different ways. There was some recent research that I saw about 2 weeks ago, which looked at the different ways between that people look at and respond to different types of training and different training formats. So the difference between millennials and baby boomers is very, very different. And I'm very much in that latter category. And I would say I'm probably more traditional and responsive to more traditional techniques. But in order to make sure that you are providing an effective awareness learning campaign, you do need to look at some of the more creative and engaging and innovative ways to engage your people. So we've developed games and scenarios and simulations. We include audio stories and podcasts. We have PDF backups if people just want to read this. We do have upfront diagnostics that allows individual learners and organizations to understand where their greatest and their biggest training gaps and the awareness gaps lie. So it's we have to enable the organization to adapt learning to suit their specific information security policies. We also are big fans, and a number of our clients do this as well, where they've appointed cyber champions across the business, people across the organization who are seen as the go-to people to share stories, share experiences, to talk about experiences and learn lessons, and to then share those across the organization. And the final underpinning thought or underpinning principle behind Resilia Frontline is the fact that you do have to measure and report on progress. As the one of the stats on the ISF slide I've just been through, it is absolutely critical to benchmark where you are and to actually measure and track the performance, the success, and the changes in behaviors over time. And we have a whole management information suite that allows any organization to do exactly that. So a few conclusions in wrapping up the presentation today. Continuing to do more of the same is not an option. We do need to move away from just providing annual awareness training to one that actually measures and understands the tangible behavior change we are looking to affect and impact, and to be able to measure that. It is very clear that as the board and the leadership teams, as Richard highlighted earlier, as they begin to get to the party and move beyond just having that understanding and awareness of cybersecurity as a critical business risk, as they become more informed and about the sorts of questions that they need to ask, you can rest assured that one of the key questions that they are going to ask is, how are we securing the human element, and can you prove it, and how can you prove it? A compliance mindset is absolutely deadly. Again, too many organizations are reliant on being compliant with the latest regulations or standards, and that is not going to make you any more secure. It is, again, an important part of being resilient, but it's not necessarily going to make you more secure. And that positive engagement with your staff is critical. The subtlety of that is that it's very clear that staff who are overworked and stressed are easy targets for the attackers and actually poor receivers of corporate training. So again, it comes back to this issue about, and the challenge that organizations, in terms of providing effective awareness training, it needs to be simple and easy to use, quick to do, engaging, innovative, and ultimately, hopefully, fun as well. Security solutions have to support existing business processes and not get in the way. We cannot get into and start impacting the productive purpose of people and organizations. That is critical. Awareness all too often continues to be seen as a quick fix and a cheap fix. We have to work a lot harder at understanding the drivers, the motivations, and the perceptions of all of our people in order to be more effective in giving them the right information to make the right decisions. The other thing I would say in terms of our experience with Resilia, and specifically around awareness training, sort of 5 key points. People pay attention to leaders, and for us, in launching and designing and managing the success of any awareness learning campaign, it is critical to get the buy-in involvement of those at the top. It's a fantastic opportunity for business leaders to emphasize to all of their people, we're not different. We believe we're as vulnerable as anyone else. We're not immune. And to demonstrate and communicate the importance of information security to all of their people. And actually just be seen to be actively rewarding good behaviors. Memories are absolutely fragile. So you have to plan to reinforce, refresh, and evolve your learning, both online and offline, over a period of time. It's not just a once-a-year thing. Many of our clients do active quarterly campaigns based on some of our recommended learning pathways, and back that up with a whole range of offline activities. Thirdly, people do absolutely learn differently. We learn in different ways. So you do have to build a very lively mix of different training formats for different people within your organization, but all designed to provide the same learning outcomes. Use all means at your disposal. You have the opportunity of building these champions across your business and get them actively involved in the design and management of your campaigns. And finally, people remember stories over the facts. Hopefully what you've heard from Richard and I today are a range of stories and narrative and anecdotes that, for me, is so powerful in communicating both to the boardroom and to all of your people the importance of cybersecurity, and helps to demystify this. We have to give people this confidence to be able to talk about cybersecurity much more openly. And great campaigns have great stories to tell, which leads me on to the final slide and brings me back to Jim Baines, whose letter I read out at the start of the presentation. Jim Baines, the reason I know him very well is that actually he's a fictional character. And when I started at AXELOS, based on my experience at Detica and working with a number of business leaders, it was apparent to me that they love storytelling, they love narrative to communicate the perceptions that they have around what are complex business issues. So we've written a thriller, a CEO cyber thriller called Waiting for Beginners, which tells the story of Jim Baines. And this is all based on real life. So we sat down with Jerome, the author, and we gave him the context for what an attack would look like, the impact of that attack, the way in which it would affect his business, the sorts of things he would need to do to respond effectively to that. And we've written Waiting for Beginners, a short story. The feedback to that we've had from the marketplace has been fantastic, because it's just a different way to engage with people and business leaders and executive management teams in particular. If you'd like a copy of that book, please do ask New Horizons, and I'll make sure that they have a supply of books to send out. Please do that. And likewise, if you want to know more about Resilia Frontline, please do talk to New Horizons, and we'd be happy to support them in hosting some follow-up calls and demos and providing access to the content. So I hope that's been interesting and informative to you. That's it from me. I'll leave you with the final slide. This is the contact details for myself and Richard. And back to you, Kelly, to answer any questions that may be out there.
Thank you so much, Nick and Richard, for joining us today. And thank you all for joining us today as well. If you have any questions for Nick or Richard or Buck or myself, please feel free to type those into the questions menu option, and we will address those over audio. We can stay on the line for the next few minutes. Also, as Nick had just mentioned, please reach out to New Horizons for any information that you'd like to receive on any of our AXELOS training and available offerings. If you are not familiar with who your local New Horizons is, you can log on to our website at newhorizons.com and do a zip code search to find the center nearest you. I also want to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link of the session recording later today, as well as a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation. You may pass these on to any colleagues or friends who would benefit from it, and you can review it at any time you'd like as well. As Buck had mentioned earlier, we do have a few more webinars coming up in our Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So if you go to our website at newhorizons.com, click on the webinars link, and there you can register for any upcoming sessions. You can also view past webinar recordings in our archive library. So Nick, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I think we can go ahead and wrap up today. Really appreciate you and Richard coming and joining us today.
Many thanks, Kelly. I hope the fact there's no questions is a good sign. I hope it's we've kept everybody interested, but delighted to have this opportunity. Thank you, Buck. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Richard. And thanks to all of you for listening. Many thanks.
Thanks, everyone. That'll conclude today's session. You may now log off.